What's up, YouTube? Austin here with AWC. I'm stoked to present my first POV or point of view build video. I'm going to be building a set of stairs going from a second story patio to a rooftop deck. It was a lot of fun. I didn't have any problems. I mean, there's always problems on a build, but nothing too crazy. This roofing was just put in. I took out the old stairs a couple months ago. I gave my customer 4 options as far as building the stairs. They went with an economical value, and it still wasn't cheap, but I'll just take you play by play through what I did to build these stairs from that second story patio up this roof segment onto the rooftop deck. First, you got to go get the materials after you do an inspection and you sell the job and so on and so forth. After the business is done, then you have to build it. So this is a 2 by 12 by 16. Not exactly light, but you know, they got to get up there. So I just kind of had to manhandle the lumber up there. I'm not sure how much these weigh. I mean, they are kind of waterlogged, probably over 100 pounds. And they're not waterlogged with actually water. I mean, PT or pressure treated lumber is soaked with some type of chemical so that it doesn't decompose when it's outside. If you know what chemical that is, feel free to comment below. I'd love to learn from you guys since I don't know everything. But anyway, I have to figure out how to get this lumber up there. So I work my way through that problem, and once I get up here, I decided to just kind of shimmy it little by little. It wasn't anything I can handle. I considered getting some help, but once we got these materials staged up on the roof, they kind of just be in the way. There's not a lot of workspace. You know, I didn't want to have to go back and forth next to somebody. Set of stairs, I mean, book time on this is probably going to be, 2 guys, about a week. My goal is to try to get it done by myself in 3-4 days. I'd be happy. If it takes 5-6 days, whatever. I just wanted to make sure it was done right and it looks good and everybody's happy. So the reason I was building these steps, it's kind of hard just drinking some water. This is actually the next day. The reason I'm replacing the stairs is because the old stairs stringers were rotten and there was a leak somewhere in the system getting on the inside. So this, I use my throw rope assembly, which is really handy for putting tarps on tops of roof. If you have an emergency and you need a little bit of time before you can fix a roof leak, then I use that throw rope, attach a lacrosse ball or a monkey's fist knot, and you throw it over the roof. You need to be careful with tile roofs so that you don't crack any tile. Always protect the materials so that you don't work with wet wood. It's already heavy enough. So this is not the most glamorous part of the job. I mean, jobs like these are never glamorous. I mean, construction can be decent money, but, I call it working in the dungeon alone. There's a lot to be done in cold, wet, dark places. First, I have to try to figure out my stringer angle at the bottom where the stringer is going to meet that lower porch area. That lower porch area just has some dirt on it, but that was resurfaced by the roofing contractor. The roofing contractor had replaced the shingles, a few weeks before to try to fix the leak. So I moved this 2 by 12 by 16 stringer board, and I seem pretty happy with that bottom section. Now I'm just trying to get my level at the top section, and right here I'm doing my plumb line. So I wanted to make sure that it was in position, and I used my level to figure out plumb, because all the rise of the stringers is going to be dependent on that one line. So right, I was able to cheat a little bit by using an old stringer, but it wasn't that much help because I was going to make some modifications to this floating stair assembly, because the old stair assembly, I believe, contributed to the roof leak. The old stringers were sliding down that shingle setup, that roofing, and it actually was tearing into the porch membrane, which is almost like a TPO material. And I believe that's because the stringers weren't strapped to the top landing running boards that were underneath the decking. So I'll just walk you through that when I get there. This single-handed sawzall, if you will, it comes in handy in a job like this. You could use the two-hand one, but I've been liking the one-hand one. Once I get that cut, I put it in a position, and I'm trying to get that top of the stringer flush with the running board. And then all of a sudden, after cutting the first one, seems pretty close, then it starts dumping, starts raining. So I'm just going to protect everything. It sucks working in the rain. I didn't want to have to work with wet tools, wet clothes, wet lumber. So decided to just quickly put everything underneath the tarp and try to wait it out in the truck for a few minutes. I can't stress about things I can't control. I was only here for about a half day. I ended up waiting for the rain. It didn't stop. So I ended up just calling it and deciding to come back the next day. So here we are, day 3. I cut the other stringers right when I get there. I'm trying to line them up, make sure they're all exact. And this is where it's going to butt up to the top running boards. This bottom portion, I'm going to put a piece of wood at the bottom of each one. And since it's going to be a floating stair assembly, I didn't want to make any punctures into the roofing brains anywhere. So I had to figure that out, how I was going to do that. And really just making these notches so that I can glue what I call a stringer butt board at the bottom on the porch patio floor so that they don't slide forward away from the top of that landing. So you'll see how I do that in a little bit. I ended up playing with the measurements of the stringers multiple times before I found something I was happy with, but luckily I made everything pretty exact. Did make some adjustments and shave a little bit of the stringers once I lined them up, just because I feel like the small little imperfections add up over time. You're like, oh wow, I wish I would have fixed that when I had the chance. It's better to be perfect. Sometimes I'll neglect them and I'll always regret it later. So if my gut tells me to make a small correction along the way, then go ahead and do that. And at this point, I'm pot committed. I felt like everything was pretty lined up, and I just wanted to secure it with some deck screws. And this is what I called that bottom stringer butt board. Basically, it's not going to be one full piece. I'm going to cut it into segments, but I'm replacing this post right here that was on the handrail, and because it's completely rotted, and I'm going to go ahead and put a carriage bolt in there and just kind of secure that first stringer in place and kind of make sure that my other 2 stringers are based off of that first one, and using this one kind of as a template. After replacing those 2 handrail posts, I ended up getting some structural screws and installing structural screws through the handrail into the building with structural screws. And that adhesive that I'm using is the 0-second hold Gorilla Glue from a big box retailer. And I've used a lot of different adhesives, and that one I've made a mistake using it in a past job and had to tear it up, and man, was it hard. It locks onto almost any surface that's clean. And you could use something even stronger like an epoxy, but this Gorilla Glue has some flexibility to it, so it's a good combination between a strong hold and a lot of flexibility, because I don't want these stringers going anywhere. So putting a generous bead underneath these running boards. And these straps that I'm installing, those weren't on the last set of stairs that I built, and I think that contributed to the problem of the stringers settling down and damaging that top coat to the porch, because before it was like a TPO top. Now it's the roofer that was there before me, which I'm not associated with, had installed like a West Coats or Enduro coat system, which is more of a cementitious. And once I get this in a position, one on the left, one on the right, then I need to work on getting the middle. And in old construction, you're never going to get exact measurements. My used to say they call it rough framing for a reason. And these straps, they didn't really have anything that was coming to mind that are specifically designed for this purpose. So I modified it a little bit so that I can have a strap on both sides of the stringer and what I'm calling the landing running boards. So once I get strapped up, then before I glue this middle one, I'm going to work on spacing. So I kind of mock it up top, mock it up at the bottom. Of course, it should be 16 inches on center, but that's in a perfect world. But in this case, it was like 16 and a quarter. Once I'm happy with my spacing, I play with it for a little while. I'm going to secure the boards, the stringers, and the running boards with just some temporary scrap wood. And up here, you have to remember to use shorter deck screws, because on the stringers to stair treads, I'm going to use 3-inch torque bit coated deck screws. But up here, if you use 3-inch, it would have gone through both 2x4s and punctured that top membrane, and you definitely don't want that. Ooh, let's get my rope out of there. And once I adjusted the spacing again, I locked it in, and everything so far is going pretty well. Talked about the glue, talked about the spacing. We got these, we adhered these stringer butt boards to the bottom. So far, so good. You always want to check level, and you don't want to step on a board or when walking up see gaps from one side to another. So I didn't really have to mess with level. That was a nice thing about shaving the stringers before. And here we are on day 3. And since the customer picked the most economical option, what that entailed was reusing this old Trex tread or deck board that I'm going to use. And so I wanted to cut off the screws that were seized inside, and that was in the contract. Hey, if you decide to use these old Trek boards, which still have their integrity, then I'm going to cut off the screws that are seized in there, but there's going to be a portion of the screw that's seized in there, which may contribute to the bad look. And they elected to just cut them off and use deck screws if I had to reposition the screw position. That Leatherman I'm using, I busted out, is Leatherman Sidekick. Man, since I got that thing, I'm using it every day. I actually got it for my birthday from the grill. Thanks, Hilo. And if you need a tool and you want to save trips, multiple trips to your truck, whether you need a screwdriver or a file or a knife or something like a hacksaw or pliers, man, that tool is invaluable. Here I'm drilling a hole to put in a piece of flashing, because water that runs between the stringer and that stucco wall, I want to hit that flashing, be redirected towards the middle. When climbing up, I saw this seagull. I heard a noise, box, and the seagull had ended up knocking out all the screws out of one of my boxes and chewed up. Anyways, I wouldn't have believed it unless I saw it. These deck boards, or treads, if you will, since they're going on the stairs, get thrown down in this way during the demo because I didn't think that we were going to reuse them, but they're okay. So I decided to clean them up and get them prepped, and then I'm going to have to carry them back up there. And jobs like this, actually, I really enjoy, that are a little bit more technical, a little bit more dangerous, just because, I like new challenges, anything that keeps me a little bit on my toes, I like it. I'm the type of guy that doesn't like to make multiple trips from the car into the house when I go to the grocery store too. So I wasn't about to bring up 3 or 4 at a time and make multiple trips up to the 3rd story. So I got a ratchet strap. I turned it into a little burrito and threw it on the shoulder, and ended up working out pretty well. But these Trex boards are really heavy. They're like made out of some like plastic. They smell funky too when you cut them. Anyways, this was actually one of the more sketchy parts, because My brain kept telling me that the treads were secure, but I left them kind of just floating there, not screwed in, just in case I needed to move them, which I'm glad I did, because I reshuffled them around because there were different lengths depending on whether it was next to a post or there's a window further down to the left where it was a little bit shorter. So I'm glad, but at the same time, it kind of tricked my brain to thinking it was safe to walk on, which definitely wasn't the case. I reviewed the footage and it didn't look like I was about to kill myself, like tripping. I didn't have a big trip, but it definitely was a little bit scary inside my head working on this, and almost tripped a couple times. That's why I set up the rope just in case, had the hard hat on, had the kneecaps on, and here I'm just securing the carriage bolts to the stringer. I know I said this was a floating assembly. I mean, it's not completely floating. You have the carriage bolts going from the handrail going through the handrail post into the stringer, and obviously the posts are attached to the handrail, and the top and bottom of the handrail, it's attached to the building with structural screws. From switching the position of this carriage bolt, I had mushroomed it out a little bit, so I used the file to get that nut on there. Comes in handy again. And this is the lower post that I'm going to put two carriage bolts in, and tightening down the nuts. And I'm almost done putting in truck boards. The GoPro actually dies here in a second, and you'll be able to see the finished product here in just a second. Here we are, a couple days later. Stairs are put back together. Give you a quick summary. We only have a minute. Get straight to the point. This was already existing. This was falling off. The stringers were completely rotted, and the roofers needed to re-roof underneath. And so that was done. I'm coming in. The stringers are floating. Those, when people walk on it, pressures on those blocks, those are glued. I didn't want to do any penetrations with the stringers or the landing up top. So I cut the stringers. I strapped the top of the stringers to these running boards that are underneath this Trex. The Trex board, these top ones, were reused, which is okay with me, but you got some old screw holes with some screws seized in it. Went ahead and put some carriage bolts through the stringer and into two posts, which give this handrail some more. Put the structural screws in, and of course strapped her up.